I know the one I interviewed and I saw that was oh, yeah. I need for speaking. Yeah. No, that's what I figured. Like a marquee shape or an edge. Yeah, it was really good.
You're no grammarian, are you?
Yeah, that's kind of I'm not part of the writing. Well,
There we go.
okay, it's time to get started. Welcome back. Hope you guys were able to recharge your batteries and what have you. So those of you who suffered for the Lord in Florida, I hope you had a great time. Let's see. Baseball, aren't you guys had some stiff competition? And rumor has it your fielding could use a bit of improvement, yes? Okay, fair enough. That'll start somewhere, right? And softball, same difference or? Yeah, how was your offense? Did you started strong? Just needs to stay strong. Okay, so well, needs to start strong, so you know what to work to, so, okay. So then, could have been better, could have been worse, so, okay. How many games did you play? 10? Pretty good teams or beatable teams? Beatable, okay, all right. Okay, well, now you guys know, and now you don't have any more snow on your field, so although your field might be squish, 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 squish.
Yeah.
Hey, can't have everything. Well, John, did you do any climbing?
I did.
Where'd you go?
I went to Kentucky and then I took an excursion to Tennessee because I don't know if you know what's happening in Kentucky. They had like record rainfall and
Yeah.
a dam broke, so like there's a lot of flooding there. And then like we were there one night and we were like, wow, the sky really opened up. We were like, yeah, let's get out of here.
I thought maybe you just climb above it.
We did try to find some caves, but then like even in the caves, we were like really wet.
That really sucks. We're going home.
Yeah, and then we went to Tennessee after that.
Okay. So you did get some climbing. Good. Well, whatever you did, Friday, my wife and I took off, went down to Indianapolis, watched my daughter play tennis, and it was 29 degrees and freezing with a stiff wind. So we're standing there trying to watch tennis, doing this, trying to keep warm. Having said that, I'm sure my daughter got worse in the tennis skirt, trying to play tennis in 29-degree weather. She didn't play particularly well, unfortunately. So they, same thing. She goes to Greenville. Their tennis courts have been covered with snow. So she's not a terribly natural athlete. So if she stops working on things deteriorate pretty quickly. And she started serving, and her serve just didn't have the pop it normally has. And it is, when you haven't been on a court serving, that's what happens to your mechanics, kind of like hitting or pitching or what have you, right? It deteriorates if you don't do it for a while. Yeah, she's looking at me. Anyway, okay, then the rest of us, the rest of you, yes, you didn't know. So it was good to see her though. Long drive, of course, but always good to see your kids. You guys will appreciate that when you have your own kids. So today, did you guys get to listen to the heart block presentation? So that should cover all the businesses about heart blocks. I also did some presentations about the arrhythmias, supraventricular, ventricular. You get a chance to listen to that, listen to that. We'll talk a bit about drugs that are used to treat arrhythmias, and different drugs will treat different types of arrhythmias. So if you don't know anything about arrhythmias, and then we're going to talk about drugs that treat arrhythmias, you're probably wondering what on earth we're talking about. Well, today we're going to talk about blood pressure, how to regulate blood pressure using pharmacology. Let's see, one last thing. We had a Bible quiz on Saturday, and my team is a young team. So normally, Lydia, you'll appreciate this. You're a rookie, you're really great, then you become a young team vet, and you're 7th grader, and you're quizzing against
A lot harder.
9th graders. Yeah, so they split them into A and B divisions. They didn't have people, so they lumped them all together. So my 7th graders got to quiz against high schoolers. They still took second. So not a bad day. Individuals was another story. It was, remember on Gospel of John, how people were jumping on the second word? It was one of those quizzes. So individuals was another story, but the Kahoot quizzing that they've started, the accuracy quizzing, my quizzer took first in the Kahoot quizzing. Out of 80 questions, she got 76 right. So go team. So we had a decent day on quizzing, and next week we'll get to quiz over the Easter section of the Gospel of John right after Easter, which will be fun. Okay, so super coffee.
Coffee.
That's a lot of coffee.
Yeah.
Hey, woman. Okay, let's have a word of prayer and let's get started. Father, thank you for a break. Thank you for warmer temperatures, for 50s, for 60s, for baseball, softball fields, golf courses, tennis courts without snow on them. We pray as we emerge from our winter of discontent, you would now give us joy, help us to enjoy the things that you've given us to do. Most of all, Lord, help us to enjoy the love of learning. Help us not learn about regulating blood pressure. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, blood pressure refers to the force that the blood will exert as it moves through the vessel. Anytime you have a fluid that moves through a tube of some sort, it will exert a force on the surface of that tube. Blood is no different. So with blood, the pressure refers to the force that's exerted per unit area. Per unit area. Now, since you guys see I'm a terrible artist, so I didn't quite get this looking very round. So maybe if I fix this, maybe look a bit more round. Don't get your hopes up. Well, it gets around, just use imagination. So if you take a cross section from a blood vessel, it's going to be a circle, isn't it? What is the area of a circle? Anyone remember? Pi r squared. So it's going to be pi, not apple or banana or whatever. It's 3.1416159, but so on and so forth, times the radius squared. Since your radius will be in, we'll just say it's in centimeters, and your area will be in centimeters squared. Blood flow is not the same as velocity. Blood flow refers to volume. The volume that's going to pass through this particular space right there. Volume. So that'll be in cubic centimeters per second. It's a volume measurement. Velocity, that's a speed measurement. So if we had a, say, red blood cell over here, let's say, and it's going to go, say, this far in 1 second, that's a distance it's going to travel per unit time. That's a velocity. And so your blood flow is equal to the area times the velocity. And then you, as you can see, in terms of units, that's going to work pretty well. And then the units here are going to be cubic centimeters per second. Now, there's another feature about blood pressure we need to acquaint ourselves with. That's the concept of resistance. Resistance. Now, in the drawing here, we have the arrows at the edge here being the smallest, the arrows in the center being the longest. That's simply because the closer you are to the edges of the tube, the more your flow will be impeded by the tube, because those molecules are interacting with the tube, they're experiencing resistance. Now, resistance can be expressed using an equation. Again, I don't want to get too deep into the whole fluid mechanics thing, but the resistance are, and again, for blood vessels around your body, this is going to be the cumulative resistance for all the vessels, but this is going to be 8 times the length which has a shorter resistance, a bigger resistance. Short vessels or long vessels? Short. Longer the vessel, the more resistance. Longer the vessel, more resistance. 8 times the length of the vessel times the viscosity of the blood. Times the viscosity of the blood. That's the Greek letter eta. That refers to viscosity. To think of viscosity, think of 2 things. So you have a glass, you pour in orange juice. How quickly does the orange juice go from the carton to the glass? Quickly. So the viscosity, the internal friction. When I say viscosity, think internal friction. How much internal friction does that orange juice have? Not very much. Now, think of pancakes and your syrup. How quickly does the syrup come out of the syrup container? Not as fast. Syrup will have a higher viscosity. A higher viscosity. Blood is going to be somewhere between syrup and orange juice. Blood contains proteins, it contains cells. That's going to increase the viscosity. How does one increase the viscosity of blood? Anyone have any guesses? Our sugar levels, Greg is right. Our sugar levels. Dehydration. Dehydration will do what to your viscosity? Increase it. Our sugar levels will increase it because you have more molecules, and those a larger number of molecules will make the blood more sluggish, higher viscosity. How about anemia? Anemia, you know what anemia is? Lower numbers of red blood cells. That will increase or decrease viscosity? Decrease viscosity. So this will be a given, a constant, except under certain conditions. So 8 times the length times the viscosity, and then times the velocity itself. Blood that's flowing faster will have a higher viscosity. Then you divide all that by the radius raised to the 4th power. By the radius of the blood vessel raised to the fourth power. Now, let's say this vessel undergoes vasoconstriction. Let's say it goes down by, gets cut in half. How much are you going to raise the resistance? Two times two times two times two is 16. You decrease this by a half, this goes up by a factor of 16. You can see why vessel diameter affects blood pressure tremendously. Now, increase this by double. Increase this by double, and now this goes down by a factor of 16. So the radius of the blood vessel is going to be a big, huge contributor to blood pressure. All right, so blood pressure is that force that the blood exerts on the vessel, the walls of the vessel, as it flows through the vessel. And as we said before, I just threw this in over the break. Viscosity is going to affect resistance. Viscosity, if viscosity increases, resistance will increase. If viscosity goes down, resistance goes down, blah, blah, blah. So viscosity is directly proportional to resistance. Vessel length is directly proportional to resistance. Vessel radius is inversely proportional to resistance. And that's all extracted from this equation right here. So, if someone is, for example, say they're obese, they have more blood going through adipose tissue. That means a longer length. Are they going to be more prone to high blood pressure? Yeah, because they're going to have more length. Someone with atherosclerosis that decreases the radius of the blood vessels. Are they going to be prone to high blood pressure? Yes, because now the radius is decreased. When the radius is decreased, the resistance goes up. So, roughly speaking, blood pressure is equal to cardiac output. Cardiac output, that doesn't mean Colorado, that's cardiac output, times the systemic vascular resistance, sometimes called peripheral vascular resistance. Those two multiplied together give you the blood pressure. So, cardiac output goes up. What happens to blood pressure? Goes up. Systemic vascular resistance goes up. What happens to blood pressure? Goes up. So, there's two ways to attack the blood pressure problem. You attack it either at the level of cardiac output or at the level of systemic vascular resistance, or both. Either one will get you to a lower blood pressure. Let me just pause right here, see if there's anything that's not quite clear. I didn't derive how we got to this. I'm just giving that to you as a given. Basically, if you think about pressure, how does fluid run through a vessel? You have a higher pressure over here than you do over here. The pressure differential drives the blood through the vessel. The pressure here essentially would be your systolic blood pressure. The pressure over here would be the pressure on the venous side. And because the pressure on the venous side is basically negligible, you have this pressure over here, which ends up being the mean arterial pressure. And that's essentially what we're going for over here, is the mean arterial pressure. Very good. So there's three main sites where you control blood pressure. First of all, obviously the heart. The faster the heart beats, the more forcefully the heart beats, the greater the cardiac output. The faster the heart beats, the more forcefully the heart beats, the greater the cardiac output. And cardiac output, again, is basically the amount of blood, the volume of blood you pump per minute. That's cardiac output. So let's pick on JP over here for a second. So JP loves to climb. Let's say Devin over here challenges him saying, I'll bet you can't climb the clock tower. And JP says, of course I can. Come on, give me something hard. And Devin says, you can't climb the clock tower, it just can't be done. And JP says, watch me. So JP gets his gear and he goes over the clock tower, and the whole class then goes over and starts cheering JP on, climb, 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 climb. And so JP has climbed the clock tower. Now the clock tower is pretty steep, but JP's pretty experienced. He knows his craft, but it's going to take a lot of work to get up that clock tower. So as he scrambles up the clock tower, finding places to put his gear, his, what would you use? Not pitons, you use.
Ooh, for the clock tower?
Yeah.
Ooh,
cinches, what do they call them? Little.
I don't even think you would use that. To be honest, the clock tower, the only way you would do anything on it, you probably wouldn't, if I'm being honest.
Recline.
You probably just put like a mattress down. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I've done it. It works.
Okay. Yeah, right from the horse's mouth here.
It's all clock broke my knee.
Oh, okay. So if we falls, we'll catch it as a class, right? No?
Yeah.
I see Evan back there and John and Mr. Chapman going, hey, I catch it. So, okay, you guys will catch him and the rest of you can just watch. All right, so as he gets up to that clock tower, his heart's gonna have to work a lot harder because he's gotta pull himself up. He has to push himself up. He's using muscle power. Those muscles need blood. That's gonna increase the heart rate. That's gonna increase blood pressure. Another site that controls blood pressure are the arterioles. So after blood goes from the arteries, from the aorta to the main arteries, it will then spread to the arterioles. The arterioles per volume have a lot of muscle, and they are constantly vasorelaxing, vasoconstricting, vasorelaxing, vasoconstricting. So let's say Hope over here gets done with a very hard volleyball game, and she's tired, so she goes and lays down on the couch, takes the load off. Oh, that was a tough game. Now, while she's lying down, her blood pressure is going to go down, but to stay conscious, her arterioles are going to vasoconstrict. Now, if Hope then says, I'm kind of thirsty. Maybe, you know, I've got that, do you like root beer? No? Do you like, what do you like? Bubbly? Okay. She's got some bubbly in the fridge. She says, I really want to drink that right now. So she gets up Now she gets up, now gravity takes the blood and pulls it down to her lower extremities. Now the arterioles need to vasodilate in order to make sure that the blood pressure doesn't drop too precipitously in cases like that. So arterioles are one of the more important regulators of blood pressure. And your post-capillary venules, they have a great deal of elasticity. These are capacitance vessels. They're capacitance vessels. They hold a large quantity of blood volume. So they also are a regulator of blood pressure. Now, the kidneys also regulate blood pressure. They do so indirectly, and they do so much more slowly. These will regulate blood pressure quickly. Kidney will do it more slowly. Why? Because the kidney controls blood volume. Blood volume. Allison, how do you think kidneys control blood volume? By filtering out water and water-soluble molecules from the blood. Therefore, the more water the kidneys get rid of, the lower the blood volume. The lower the blood volume, the less pressure you're going to have on the walls of the vessels. So, some blood pressure drugs will work in the kidney as well. And they're going to work indirectly in that regard. Let's talk a bit. Yeah, Josh.
So for that reason, is it bad to have too much blood?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a condition. Well, first of all, if say you're going under the knife and you get an IV, the amount of fluid going into you has to be very carefully monitored. Because if you overload someone with fluid, that's called hypervolemic shock. And hypervolemic shock, first of all, your electrolytes get diluted. Secondly, your vessels now are going to get expanded to a level where it's potentially dangerous. If you have a weak vessel, you can burst it. Then your dilution of your electrolytes, and then the pressure that puts on the kidney as well is potentially very dangerous. Also, many of the capillary beds and tissues, they're very delicate. They get expanded, they're going to pop. You're going to get bleeding into those tissues. You're going to have end organ damage. You're going to die on the table. So you have to regulate the volume that goes into someone very carefully. Secondly, if you're not hydrated, then too little blood. Also, there was this really idiotic contest. You're way too young to remember this. I think this was like 10 years ago. This radio station sponsored a contest to see how much people could drink. You have heard of this. Yeah. This moron said, we're going to see who can drink the most in, I forget the length of time, but you couldn't go to the bathroom. And this one contestant talked about her headache, which is first danger sign, dum-dum. And I'll go to the bathroom, and a couple of people died from it. And that jackass should have been sued. He should have gone to jail. I think he just got a fine. Frankly, I think 10 years would have done him just fine for a stunt like that. Anyway, that's another example of induced hypervolemia, hypervolemic shock due to excessive drinking. So that's just as bad as dehydration. Now, baroreflexes will regulate blood pressure on a moment-by-moment basis. And to illustrate how baroreflexes work, we can do a very simple experiment. And I'll just have you push away from the desk so you can get up easily. And then go ahead and find either a radial or a jugular pulse. And then look at the clock there and just get a pulse in 10 seconds or something. Because I'm going to tell you to get up here in a second. So after you get a pulse, go ahead. Now stand up. Take pulse. Did your pulse change? Yeah, if it didn't, let me know, there's something wrong. How did it change?
Yeah.
Not faster. Not faster. You can say consider, so it got faster. So when you got up, gravity took the blood that had been pooling in your capacitance vessels, largely in your lower extremities. Now gravity pulled that blood down your lower extremities. You pull blood down your lower extremities. Is there more blood for your head? No. So your heart has to beat faster and your vessels have to constrict in order to make sure your pressure in your head stays the same. Otherwise, you're going to experience syncope. You're going to pancake. And that's not good. So the baroreflexes are going to guarantee that you have this moment by moment adjustment according to posture. According to posture. And here's how these work. So baro, B-A-R-O, refers to pressure. It can also refer to stretch. So these are specialized nerve cells that you can see right here. These are receptors, they sense blood pressure. They sense it by sensing the stretch in the walls of the vessels. They then relay that information to the brain, and they keep the blood pressure balanced during this time. So you have arterial baroreceptors. They're found in the wall of the aortic arch right here. These are going to form part of the 10th or the vagus cranial nerve. So this is a sensory branch of the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. That branch, as you can see, comes from the vagus nerve, and then it innervates these baroreceptors in the aortic arch. Next, you have the carotid arch, or the carotid sinus baroreceptors. They are part of a branch of the sensory branch of the 9th cranial nerve, that is the glossopharyngeal, cranial nerve. So both of these send their fibers up to the brainstem. Up to the brainstem. They carry information about the stretch going on in those vessels. Now in the brain, they're going to synapse at the NTS. The NTS, this is the nucleus. Tractus solitarius. You can see why it's abbreviated NTS. The nucleus tractus solitarius. This is in the medulla oblongata. Of the brainstem. It will then relay information to the cardiovascular centers. And unfortunately, cardiovascular centers are very close by. These are in the lower area of the pons. So essentially, these two are right on top of each other. You have the pons and then the medulla. So the information goes to the medulla and then to the cardiac centers and the pons. Okay, What are these going to control? These are going to control the sympathetic and parasympathetic inputs to the heart and to the blood vessels. They're going to control the sympathetic and parasympathetic inputs to the heart and the blood vessels. Now let's review. Sympathetic input to the heart causes the heart to speed up and to contract more forcefully. Tells the heart to speed up and contract more forcefully. What does sympathetic input do to blood vessels? Vasoconstriction. So it causes vasoconstriction and increased cardiac output. So you get up from sitting. You get vasoconstriction, so that blood just doesn't go whoosh right down into your legs. It's going to pool a little and then kind of trickle into your legs. Meanwhile, increased cardiac output forces blood up to your head. Now, parasympathetic. What does that do to the heart? Slows it down. But it does not affect force of contraction. It just affects cardiac rate. It just affects cardiac rate. It's very readable. Mine is just chicken scratch. Okay, now what does the parasympathetic system do to blood vessels?
Dilate them.
No, does nothing. Does nothing. It doesn't vasoconstrict. So if you activate the parasympathetic, the signal to constrict is inhibited. So you don't constrict. It doesn't cause vasodilation. There are signals that cause vasodilation, but the parasympathetic system is not one of them. All right, now, in the cardiac center, you have two units in the cardiac center. You have a cardiac accelerator and a cardiac decelerator. Cardiac decelerator and a cardiac, we'll put this in red, accelerator. Cardiac accelerator will activate the, which branch of the autonomic nervous system will it activate? Sympathetic. So the heart rate will go up and you will vasoconstrict, which I'll just say VC, vasoconstrict. Cardiac decelerator will lower the heart rate. And you will not vasoconstrict. So this one will be pro-parasympathetic, whereas this one will be pro-sympathetic. So you go from sitting to standing. Sitting to standing will cause a decrease in the amount of stretch in these baroreceptors. That is going to tell the cardiocenter to activate this one and not activate this one. You then go back to sitting. Now you have pooling, you have increased stretch. Now you're going to not activate this one, but you'll activate this one. And this essentially moment by moment activation, deactivation of these different centers is going to regulate blood pressure on a moment by moment basis. So this is called the postural baroreflex. Postural baroreflex. And you can see this spelled out here. Yeah, that's all right. Okay, so CO, cardiac output, resistance. We have a declining blood pressure because say you lay down to take a nap, or you sat down, or you whatever. Arterial pressure falls below normal range. You therefore have the receptors here. They're not getting stretched or inhibited. They stimulate the vasomotor center. Cardiac input goes up, and you get vasoconstriction. This returns blood pressure back to the normal range. Then you stand up, you start walking, whatever. Now you have increased stretch. Now you inhibit vasomotor center. You activate the parasympathetic system. Heart rate goes down, and now you're not vasoconstricted anymore. Now the blood pressure keeps returning back to that range. This ensures that regardless of what happens here, your flow rate essentially through the blood system stays about the same. Stays about the same. That way, you still get blood to tissues. And this is just a plumbing system essentially that shows you that you go from the aortic arch, cardiac sinus, to the NTS, and then to these various centers here that will activate the heart or the SA node or what have you. The red means it's activating the sympathetic nervous system, the green, the parasympathetic nervous system. And again, notice parasympathetic just affects heart rate, does not affect force of contraction or the diameter, well, directly at least, of these vessels. All right. That is essentially the regulation of blood pressure on a moment by moment basis. Also, there are local ways you can regulate blood pressure to tissues. So for example, the heart, the coronary arteries of the heart, when the demand for oxygen in the cardiac muscle goes up, those vessels will dilate. So let's say Lydia goes out with her track buddies and she decides to work on her 200, just one more time for old time's sake. And she hits the 200, her cardiac rate's going to go up, oxygen demand of the heart's going to go up. Those arterial cardiac coronary arteries are going to vasodilate. That is a local response to need. Several tissues have these types of responses. You see that in the lung, you see that in the heart, you see that in skeletal muscle too. And this is again due to the fact that when the tissue needs more oxygen, it will release metabolites that will cause the local vessels near it to vasodilate. That's a local sort of thing. That's also why those of you who've worked in the HES lab, when you get someone on the treadmill and they run like mad and their blood pressure goes up when they stop running, all of a sudden their blood pressure tanks for, half a minute, something like that. You've seen that? Okay, you think you've seen it? That's due to the local responses of those tissues essentially wanting more. So you have this vasodilation. In some people, it lasts a long time. That's why they'll get off the machine and they'll, due to the fact that the vasodilation just tends to last for a longer time. And then that's due to local features of tissues. They'll release small molecules. One of the biggies is nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is a powerful vasodilator, but it's used locally. You don't use it systemically typically because it has a very short half-life. Now, there are drugs that will trade on this, cardiac nitrates, and we'll talk more about those when we get to heart failure and things like that.
What's happening when you like just stand up quickly?
When you stand up too quickly, that's pooling the blood, and the baro response doesn't work fast enough. That's usually if you've been sitting for a while, and blood has started to pool, and now a lot of that fluid is in the lymph system, because you haven't pumped the lymphatics either, because you haven't been walking. That may happen too if you're on an airplane. And you get up too quickly, want to get out of here. If you get up too fast, it's like, oh dear. Also, you drive, because the air exchange in the airplanes is extremely good, so it pulls fluid out of you too. And that's the other reason why on the airplane, you get up too fast. Also, you get up too fast, you bump your head. That makes you a little doozy too. And I hate bumping my head. Gosh, I hate it. Now, there are drugs called sympathoplegics. Sympathoplegics. Sympathoplegics inhibit the effect of the sympathetic nervous system. They're going to be used typically during surgery. You're not usually going to use those for blood pressure, except under unusual circumstances. So there are drugs that work in the central nervous system, and they inhibit this process. Most of your drugs are going to work out here in the peripheral nervous system. Let's look at a couple drugs that affect the central nervous system response. So this is methyl-dopa. Methyl-dopa. Methyl-dopa works in the central nervous system. It's a sympathoplegic. This can cross the blood-brain barrier. Because it crosses the blood-brain barrier, it can cause sedation, sometimes very profound sedation. That's one of the big side effects of this. Also, because of its sympathoplegic effects, it will prevent you from salivating properly. You'll get a dry mouth as well. And in males, you'll get erectile dysfunction, consequently. Now, is this drug used very much? No, but this is one of the drugs of choice for high blood pressure in a pregnant woman. This drug is safe during pregnancy. That's where this drug gets used, is typically in pregnant women. This drug is not a hugely powerful antihypertensive. So this will be for women whose blood pressure is just moderately high. Not for those whose blood pressure is really high. There's a different drug that you'd use if it's really high. But this is safe for pregnancy, and for moderate hypertension during pregnancy, this is your drug of choice. This drug works the same way as methyl-dopa. So this is clonidine. Clonidine, you may have heard, is used for ADHD. It's used for ADHD because it will increase norepinephrine levels in the forebrain. And norepinephrine signaling in the forebrain seems to be the deficit that causes ADHD. So some kids benefit from this drug for ADHD, but it has a side effect, namely, it can lower your blood pressure. So it can make the kid really dopey. Because of that, it's not first choice for kids with ADHD. But if other drugs fail, this drug is also used. It's not used that much for blood pressure anymore. It's used mainly for ADHD in children. So it's used at a low dose. Also, it's given in an extended release form that doesn't tend to cause the blood pressure to tank. In that regard, the drug is pretty safe and pretty effective. But it's usually not used that much as a take-home remedy. For this very reason, also with this drug, well, this and also with methyl-dopa, you get off this drug immediately, your blood pressure can soar. So you always step off this drug. You step off it. Now, this agent here, trimethophan, is going to block these autonomic ganglia right here. This will block both sympathetic and parasympathetic inputs. Why might you want to do that? Well, what if you're doing surgery on a vessel? Let's say someone has an aneurysm and you're repairing the aneurysm. That's essentially when you'd use this drug here. So this will be used in surgery. This drug blocks those receptors on the ganglia. Consequently, when you come to, after having had this drug, you're going to be pretty hungover. This drug causes a lot of hangovers. So it's not used as a blood pressure medicine. It's used essentially to keep vessels still while you're working on them. Oh dear. That's hard to see. Maybe we should fix that. Should we fix that? Let's try to fix that. Okay. Let's do this. There. Can you see that now? Better? See what a little magic can do. Now, this drug is also not used very much for blood pressure. This is used also for ADHD. So guanfacine is going to prevent your sympathetic nerves from releasing norepinephrine and epinephrine because it prevents norepinephrine and epinephrine from getting packaged inside synaptic vesicles. So you get a reduction in heart rate. You get no vasoconstriction. Consequently, with this drug, you get a condition called postural hypotension. Postural hypotension. That means if you stand up, you get really dizzy. This is a common side effect of many blood pressure medicines because your baroreceptor response is sluggish now. This is sometimes called orthostatic hypotension. These are used interchangeably. Just means when you change your posture, when you change your position, the room starts to spin. And this also increases norepinephrine concentration in the forebrain. That's why it's used for ADHD. Not used so much for blood pressure anymore, but if you use it, that's a side effect of it. It will lower blood pressure and it will cause postural hypotension. So if you're, say, a pediatrician, or let's say Lydia, who's going to be an OT, let's say she has a child, and this child is on this medicine for ADHD, Lydia's going to warn her parents when he or she gets up after sitting down, they may be a little unsteady. Tell them to get up slowly, or to get up holding on to something. Then they won't pancake and have an injury. All right, now, when we look at epinephrine and norepinephrine, we have this parent compound. That parent compound is catechol. Catechol. So these are catechol derivatives, but they have an amine. So these are called catecholamines. Catecholamines. Man, it's nice to see that sun out. Ah, I love it. An old friend I haven't seen for months. Now, these catecholamines are neurotransmitters used by sympathetic nerves. So you can design drugs that look like this, that will bind to the receptors that these bind. And isoproterenol is a agonist of these receptors. So isoproterenol is actually used as an inhaled form to actually open up your bronchial passages. It's also used experimentally if you want to activate the sympathetic nervous system. But you can also design drugs that will inhibit these receptors, and these are your beta blockers. Beta blockers. Now, beta blockers come in two groups. Some will inhibit both beta 1 and beta 2 adrenergic receptors. Those are the non-selective beta blockers. To remember this group, remember New Zealand. New Zealand. Why? Because if the beta blocker begins with N through Z, they're non-selective. So nisodolol, pindolol, propranolol, all those N, P, so on and so forth, they're non-selective. And if you begin with A through M, you are selective. That means you have a much higher affinity, much higher selectivity for the beta 1 receptor than you do for the beta 2 receptor. So this would be betaxolol, bispropolol, metoprolol, atenolol, so on and so forth. They begin with A through M. A through M. And to remember this one, think armadillo. A through M. Armadillo. Get it? A-M. Okay, it's stupid. Allison's looking at me as if to say, you're not funny. It's not meant to be funny. It's meant to help you remember. Alpha-1 receptors. Alpha-1 receptors are found on blood vessels. Blood vessels. When they bind catecholamines, they constrict. Alpha blockers bind these receptors and they don't elicit a response. They get in the way of the catecholamines. So they are alpha blockers. Notice these all end with azocin. Azocin. If the drug name ends with azocin, it is an alpha blocker. So prazocin, terazocin, doxacin, terazocin, nimazocin, your mother-in-law's ocin, those are all alpha blockers. Those aren't used that much anymore because you get resistant to them. What they are used for is for BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia, because they shrink the prostate. And they're also used for PTSD because they prevent people with PTSD from having nightmares. And we'll stop here because now we're going to talk about the kidney. That gets right a bit more complicated. All right. Welcome back. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Thank you.
Like you could like 12 minutes.